So, good morning all again. I would like first to thank the Urban Lab for this invitation. And actually, as a Lebanese citizen, I might even say thank you for the Urban Lab for all the incredible work that is currently being done. Our session today is about recovering public spaces, incremental tactics, integrated design, holistic vision. In 2 sentences, very quickly, I'll introduce myself. So I'm an architect, urban planner. I'm basically a practitioner. I love teaching, and I believe in research. I think this will summarize it all. And I forgot my name. It's Serge Yazigi. Then I would like to present, because actually I got emotional a bit in the morning, because for the first time I see students of mine that I do appreciate a lot that are in a panel. So I'll take a few minutes, if you allow me, just through 2 sentences for each to be presenting them. It's not in order. So Mariam Bazé is a researcher trained in landscape architecture and urban design. Her research interests also that does include water management, governance of riparian landscapes. She holds, as many of them actually, a master's degree in urban design and a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture from the American University of Beirut. Welcome, Mariam. Mahmoud Boukan'an holds a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture from the American University of Beirut and is currently working on his thesis in urban design at the Maroun Sam'an Faculty of Engineering and Architecture. He investigates the reproduction or production of open public spaces and is an advocate for making them more inclusive. Dana Mazra'ani. So Dana is an urbanist and architect. She holds a double master's degree in international cooperation in urban development and planning from Université Grenoble-Alpes and TU Darmstadt. Her previous research covers inclusive design, urban informality, and the transformation of Beirut's relationship to street and outdoor life. Batul Yassin, she's an urban designer and architect. She's interested in residual private/public spaces and their appropriation by different communities. She holds a master's in urban design from AUB and a master's in architecture from Lebanese University. We have also Abir Shaitille. So Abir holds a bachelor's degree in architecture from the LAU and a master's degree in urban design from AUB. She also holds a pro-green diploma in green technologies and buildings. Ali Ghaddar, whom I had the honor to supervise his thesis, Ali is an urban planner, designer, and architect. He holds a master's in urban planning and policy from AUB, and his thesis looked on performance-based planning. Ali co-founded District D, a multidisciplinary collaborative initiative of urbanists. Leen Hamdar, she's an urban designer, urban planner, and architect, currently working at Dar al-Handasa, and her experience covers both neighborhood scale and mega-urban rural projects. I'll be later on presenting our discussant, Christine Madi. So I believe only four will be presenting the work of the whole team. Tfaddalu.
Thank you, Serge. Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this last panel, which is focused on the lab's planning practice approach through micro-scale projects and bottom-up urbanism. A few months after the blast, the Beirut Urban Lab was approached by NGOs who had funds earmarked for communal use, so that's community facilities and open public spaces. And as panel 1 showed, by that time, the lab had positioned itself as a key actor in the recovery process, in part due to its online platform and presence. And as demonstrated by my colleague Antoine earlier, the observatory was initially conceived as a tool to increase visibility between actors about the work being done and to enhance coordination. For that purpose, we developed an observation-based survey of open and accessible parcels in Maram Khail and Hikmeh that we posted online. And again, we noticed that there was overlap between actors. So the same facility would have initiatives planned for it by multiple actors, which was a waste of time and resources, and this had happened at the time with shelter. So aside from the survey, this prompted us to map community-based interventions led by CSOs and NGOs and others in the areas affected by the blast, in order to facilitate coordination between the different actors, but also to inform dwellers about the ongoing projects in their neighborhoods. This was an essential step because at the Beirut Urban Lab, we believe that public and shared spaces are central to a holistic and inclusive recovery. And it's one of the tracks we had been working on since the establishment of the lab, and it was only natural to expand it to the scope of the post-blast recovery. Aside from that, the observatory also allowed us to engage in experimental and projects and approaches to deal with the reality of not having a custodian of the public good, which we've been hearing about all day. So where you usually have a state entity in charge with a clear vision and adequate funding, you instead have no one in charge and no vision, and opportunities presenting as sparse and punctual projects with very limited funds and a restricted donor timeline. So we're talking $15,000 to $30,000, which, especially in terms of public space intervention, is very little. And Mahmoud will be discussing this project that we're working on in a bit. This led us to test a strategy of micro-scale public space interventions with several partners, such as ACTED, Live Love Lebanon, the Beirut Heritage Initiative, and URBI. Our contribution builds on the work presented by Antoine earlier of the observatory and enacts a vision of public space with these partners, while at the same time pushing to strengthen the role of public institutions through advocacy and lobbying for an urban planning unit in the governorate of Beirut. The challenges faced were many. So on the one hand, we had to navigate the legal landscape pertaining to the permitting process, the lack of as-built drawings, issues with tenure, and Batul will discuss this in a bit in the examples of Karentina. But also the resistance of public sector employees who are used to very specific ways of intervening on public space that are really in contradiction with the ecological and social sensibilities of today. We also faced challenges in relation to the dissonance between the single-space punctual approach with limited funds and the continuity of an infrastructural network that needs to be conceived at the scale of the city in order to be functional, especially in Mar Mikhail and Karentina, where the infrastructure is old and dilapidated. All of this proved the need to have a holistic vision to integrate all the small-scale interventions, and this is what Mariam will present in a bit today. At the lab, we decided to adopt a multi-scalar approach in order to adapt to the needs of the city and make use of the scattered funding available. We decided to focus on a pilot project introduced earlier by Antoine briefly. So this pilot project is along the Fuad Butrus highway trajectory, which we redubbed as Al-Masar al-Akhdar, or the Green Path in Arabic, making use of the multiple properties that were expropriated by the municipality of Beirut decades ago. And again, all the information gathered was posted as part of the observatory as an output called Al-Masar al-Akhdar, and it's shared as an interactive map for anyone to make use of. Bless you. So we've developed a strategic framework that is based on 4 critical principles, and this is how we're operating at the moment. So the first is a micro-scale project approach, which adopts the same urban planning values for all the projects, and that is pedestrianization, walkability, greening, etc. The second principle is the integrated vision that makes sense of these micro projects as a comprehensive whole and that links to the rest of the city, and that also builds off of previously developed strategies for the city, such as the Plan Vert or mobility strategies developed by URBI in the early 2010s. The third, of course, is reclaiming custodians for the public interest, and again, this is done through lobbying for the planning unit in the governorate that we've discussed multiple times today. because it's public authorities who are expected to play this role, and specifically the municipality. And studies have shown time and again that when it comes to recovery, people will not return to their neighborhoods if the public and shared spaces are neglected. It's the place where they socialize and connect. And finally, the fourth principle, is linking up with other actors to create a shared vision and organizing public debates among professionals to create an ecosystem that will produce a planning doctrine or a shared understanding where we generate consensus about specific ideas and common planning values. And city debates is one of these ways we do it. This is all a slow process, and it's also possible through connecting with key people and agents in public institutions who are really aligned on our planning values. To sum up, we're working on multiple scales with multiple partners, and we're learning as we go how one can intervene in the public realm tactically and incrementally. And as we heard this morning, to establish an urban planning unit that will connect all of these scales and all of the roles at the governorate. I leave the floor to my colleagues Batul and Mahmoud, who will present our approach in Karentina and Hikmeh, and to Mariam, who will discuss the holistic vision. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I will pick up where Dana left off and explain about one example of the BUL microscale projects in Karentina as part of our post-blast recovery efforts. In this project, actually, the lab adopted a participatory approach towards designing and implementing an inclusive community space in Karentina, particularly Sahat al-Khudr. So as many of you know, and as presented earlier in the other panels, Karentina, lying 600 meters to the east of the explosion's epicenter, is one of the poorest neighborhoods of Beirut that was historically a major destination of migrant workers and refugees, and was heavily damaged by the explosion. It hosts low-income communities and has a total population of 2,500 people. So it has also 3 main sub-neighborhoods with different socioeconomic profiles. So we have a Saidi sub-neighborhood, which is mostly inhabited by Christians. Al-Khudr sub-neighborhood, which is the home of the Arab tribal families, Syrian refugees, and migrant workers as well. And the transition between both, which is Senegal. Zooming into Al-Khudr sub-neighborhood, which is the site of our intervention here, it was a priority to our research team as the area is the most deprived among the other 2 sub-neighborhoods from an urban environment and infrastructural perspective. Adding to this, the area hosts mostly low-income groups of Lebanese and Syrian families. So basically, it was a priority for us to intervene on. In addition, we conducted an exhaustive socio-spatial practices mapping that showed the highest concentration in the heart of Al-Khudr sub-neighborhood. These practices were diverse in terms of the practice itself and the user groups. So there were spaces where women spent their afternoons, where children played and rode their bicycles, others where men gathered, played cards, and smoked nargile. The observations of our research team regarding the site selection were substantiated by in-depth socioeconomic data collected by local researchers, as Dr. Huwaida previously mentioned in the first panel, that were trained by our team on research methods, ethics, and fieldwork. That training falls under the BUL's position on recovery as being people-centered and participatory. So we resorted to the citizen science methodology combined with other modes of engagement that supported the bigger framework, which this project is part of. To further validate the site selection, we conducted several consultation sessions with the community groups in Al-Khudr sub-neighborhood, and in specific the street stretch where this intervention will happen. So the residents and business owners, they described the space as the heart of the neighborhood and the square of affinity, Sahat al-Ilfi. So this space was really meaningful for them. They also drafted on paper their vision and aspirations of the street and located the social spaces that need to be focused on. These consultations basically paved the way for initiating the design process that included a series of co-design workshops with the community. So 3 main workshops took place in the area, where we used different design and representational tools to simplify the design proposals for the residents and business owners and make them more interactive to understand the design and facilitate for addressing their concerns and demands. So the final design was set into implementation after being revised multiple times during the workshops. And the implementation was launched on the first anniversary of the port's explosion in a public event entitled Al-Ilfa Tijmana, which was organized jointly with the funding agencies, acted as the funder for implementation, and UCL as the funder for the design. The actual implementation started in December, basically a couple of months after the launching event, and after securing the required permits from the municipality. Stemming out from our values on the importance of engaging the community in the different phases of the project, the community was engaged in multiple forms in the implementation as well. So firstly, we engaged the previously trained local researchers. So 2 of them were trained on the site supervision. They were trained on reading engineering and construction details and played a major role in resolving arising disputes between residents during implementation. They were also constantly reporting to our team on the work progress and bridging us with the contractor. Secondly, the community was also engaged in the actual implementation as part of the skilled and the non-skilled labor. So we imposed, as mentioned earlier also in panel 1, we imposed on the contractor a specific quota of local labor. So members of the community took part in cleaning the site before and after implementation, securing the equipment at night, tiling the sidewalks, planting the trees, and painting the building facades. This is the site after the completion of the first phase of the project that included the introduction of a sidewalk, installation of bullards, street lights, trash bins, tree grates, planting trees, and asphalting. Building facades were also renovated on the street. Plastering were necessary and painting them to complete the streetscape as planned. The project was phased and adjusted due to several challenges that required change of plans last minute. So the first major challenge was tenure. 3 lots falling on the street weren't subdivided as shown in the picture, in which the part highlighted in red was still part of the private property on the title deeds, although ultimately the subdivision will occur at a specific period of time, and the subdivided part will be given to the public, but that required years of implementation. So we ended up implementing one side of the sidewalk that falls within the public domain and altering the design accordingly, as shown in the picture. The tenure issue was coupled with a complicated and bureaucratic permitting process. So the project necessitated the issuance of several permits, starting from Qubul al-Hiba to the actual implementation permit. And basically, this took over 7 months of following up with the municipality, starting in August 2021 till Feb 2022. Furthermore, funding limitations and deadlines was a third challenge that influenced to a great extent the progress of the project. The implementation funding was to end, for this project basically, was to end in December, and due to the delays in the permitting process and the resolving the tenure issues, we had to adjust our plan and rechannel part of the funding to painting the facades so that we do not lose the remaining money. And that required delaying the implementation of other layers as per the original plan, such as the benches, for example, to phase 2 and raise funds for that. We were able, that was the good part of the story, we were able to secure funding from the NRC, and this phase will be completed by the end of March. A fourth challenge was dealing with some people favoring their private interest over the public good. This is one example here of a shop owner who refused to use the interlock tiles in front of his coffee shop, but rather used ceramic tiles, and thus disrupting the continuity of the sidewalk. I think these challenges were also encountered in other interventions of the lab, as will be discussed in the following presentation by my colleague Mahmoud. It's worth mentioning that this project is a part of a wider project that included a holistic vision of the open spaces in Karentina that the lab worked on. So our team mapped the existing conditions and the various types of locations of the socio-spatial practices and generated a heat map of the practices that was analyzed and identified potential areas of interventions. This was further discussed with the community towards crafting a shared vision for the open spaces in Karentina and was technically done through different modes of engagement, through town hall meetings, thematic discussions, and workshops. The crafted vision sought to reconnect the sub-neighborhoods in Karentina to also upgrade the urban environment, enforce the socio-spatial practices, and basically these socio-spatial practices that constitute part of the identity of the areas, different areas in Karentina. This vision will be further elaborated into an integrated vision that will be that extends to Mar Mikhail and Hikmeh and will be discussed with Mariam towards the end of this panel. The project was phased into 4 phases, starting from intervening on community spaces in each sub-neighborhood, to reconnecting them through a connective tissue, upgrading the rest of the street network, and activating the role of particular social magnets, such as the mosque, the church, the hospital, and so on, specific dukans in the neighborhood. The crafted vision served as an opportunity here, and to echo with what Dana mentioned at the beginning, to present a new model of coordination among many actors who had available funds to intervene on the public domain. So the coordination involved the BUL as a research lab, INGOs and NGOs as implementation agencies, funding and implementation agencies, the municipality as well as the public local authority, and the community groups as being part of the decision-making process in this project. And we held several meetings for that purpose in partnership with the UNDP at a specific point. To conclude, this intervention is part of a wider project we are working on at the lab for the recovery of Karentina. So the spatial intervention is part of the open space network that is one of the proposed action plans resulting from the strategic framework developed for the recovery of Karentina under what is known as the City Development Strategy that was discussed earlier in panel 1. Thank you. I will give the floor to Mahmoud to speak about the intervention of Al-Masar al-Akhdar.
Thank you, Batul.
Hi, everyone. So after looking at some of the work that has been done in Karentina, I would now like to talk about the ongoing work on the Masar al-Akhdar project being done at the lab in coordination with Mr. Habib Dibis and his team at URBI. Now, before diving into the Masar al-Akhdar, I must restate the fact that all our proposals that are related to open space networks are following the larger Plan Vert vision that have been created by Habib Dibis and funded by Région Île-de-France that inspires us to work towards a greener Beirut that integrates the notion of greening into the idea of mobility, urban mobility, while depending on continuous pedestrian links as the main ingredient for a solid public space network. And while looking at some of the strategic links that could relieve neighborhoods such as Jemaize and Mar Mikhail from transit traffic or vehicular traffic and potentially restitch these neighborhoods back to the city and the sea, one specific link stands out today and comes in form of the city's connection to the port, a link that which have been further highlighted and lobbied for following the August 4 blast. So knowing that my colleague Mariam would be talking to us further about this, I would like to direct our attention inwards towards Al-Masar al-Akhdar project, which works on strengthening this inter-neighborhood connection between Ashrafiyya, Hikmeh, and Mar Mikhail before we move on to talk about the connection with the port. And now one of the main factors that sets this inter-neighborhood connection apart is, of course, the Fuad Boutros highway proposal, a project that has caused lots of controversy and which have led urban activists and planners to successfully lobby for its transformation from a city-scale highway into a potential city-scale park. So today we have two main factors that currently place this project again at the foreground of public space interventions. Firstly, the fact that many lots that fell within the projection of the Fuad Boutros highway have either been completely or partially expropriated by the municipality of Beirut, an action that is way more unlikely to happen today due to the tough economic situation that the city finds itself in. And the other main factor, of course, that pushes us to work and to take action is found in the momentum at which NGOs and humanitarian organizations are taking action today, which allows us to finally believe that projects like these have the chance to actually see light. So about land ownership, and if we take a quick look at the trajectory of the proposed highway, and specifically on the lots at which the highway was projected, we would be able to kind of understand the current ownership patterns on these lots. And on the map, you can see highlighted in light blue all the lots at which the municipality has complete control or ownership, in addition to, of course, the lots which fall under the public domain. However, all the hatched lots in dark blue signify that the ownership is shared between municipality and WAF, or between municipality and private owners. So it's a shared ownership scenario. Sorry.
What do you mean by shared?
So I'm gonna be
partial expropriation.
I'm gonna be defining that later on. I just want to check. I need to. Anyway, so what we mean by shared is like there has been what we call a wada al-yad by the municipality on these lots, but we still don't know as to how much the municipality actually owns from these lots. And within in this context of severe red taping and refusal to give actual information from the public agencies, we're still trying to manage our way through these challenges in order to actually design this stretch at hand. And of course, we must not forget the other question that falls here is to how do we manage or balance our aspirations for a city-scale link versus, let's say, the locals' appropriation of these long-neglected public spaces, publicly owned spaces, and how do we find this balance? So this is one question that could be asked here. Now, the other assets, other than land ownership that we are working with here first, is of course, the heritage layer, which is quite rich in the area. We can see on the map the buildings are classified as A, B1, and B2 according to UBL's latest UNESCO study. In addition to the visually prominent facades that have been mapped up close on site with Mr. Habib Debes, to study specific viewports that could retain the immersive experience of circulating alongside a cohesive pedestrian scale green link, which of course means that we also had to look at building heights to be able to point out problematic viewports where there's a loss of homogeneity in the built fabric, and highlight it as a design issue as well. And another main asset here, which was surveyed up close as well, is the vegetative cover that plays a big role in the notion of the non-built heritage due to the existence of several landscape heritage typologies such as the productive landscape, the ornamental private garden with the see-through fences, and some remains of the natural landscape of the city. Typologies that we believe should be preserved while at the same time become more accessible to the public since they play a big role in telling the story of the neighborhood. The last layer to be highlighted here would be the current network of pedestrian connections that is mainly present in form of the famous public staircases, in addition to the narrow pedestrian links that mostly come in form of the rite of passage. And of course, we shouldn't forget the role of the street itself as a publicly owned asset that should also play a role in the strengthening of this pedestrian network. Now, if they overlay all these layers, all these assets, we are able to produce this synthesis map that paints a clearer picture of all the factors that should influence any design decision that we take, and also allows us to signal out strategic points of micro-scale interventions in order to set the stage for the larger vision of the Masar al-Akhtar to take shape, while also providing NGOs and actors with realistic packages which they would be able to implement. And I would like to end by presenting the Man Bkhail Square, which represents a pilot project for other micro-scale interventions that could take shape, located strategically at the intersection between Pasteur, Guru, and Armenia Street, while sitting at the base of the Ghulam staircase, a project that focuses on reclaiming the street environment back to the benefit of pedestrian activities, while playing a big role as a vital node within the larger network of public spaces. So we looked at the square and the built cluster that surrounds it as complementary elements. And we started the study by mapping ground floor businesses and uses as well as parking practices to understand the dynamics at which the space functions, in addition to conducting extensive interviews with the resident and shop owners to get the idea of the daily needs and what are the main challenges they would like to see, changes that they would like to see happen, specifically when it comes to the framework of public space intervention. And also the work mainly focused on trying to maximize the potential of available open and residual spaces by looking at the stairs, for example, as a more of a social gathering hub rather than a simple throughway that stretches the boundaries between what is public and what is private, while proposing measures that reconfigures the street environment for the benefit of pedestrian activities in an effort to reactivate ground floor businesses and allow for continuity in the open space network. It is important to note that it took us lots of months to convince the municipality about the idea of prioritizing pedestrian space over vehicular circulation, even though we were able to compensate for the majority of the lost parking spaces. But finally, with the help of our design and engineering consultants, we were able to reach a final design for the square that has been approved, and we are currently in the process of initiating the project's implementation. So wish us luck there. And now I will be leaving the floor to my colleague Mariam in order to take a step back and actually be able to see the bigger picture again, what we're doing.
Thank you, Mahmoud.
Thank you, Mahmoud.
Okay. So hi, everyone. So as Dana has mentioned earlier at the beginning of this panel, the Beirut Urban Lab is working towards an integrated vision for an open space network in the areas affected by the blast. We decided to go through this process because we believe that the recovery of open spaces and shared spaces, the recovery of neighborhoods is integral to a full-scale urban recovery. This vision builds upon the Plan Vert of Beirut and integrates micro-scale interventions taking place in the area affected by the blast, including Al-Masar Akhdar, which was just presented by Mahmoud, and Karentina Open Space Network presented by Batul. We also aim to channel the work of NGOs working in the area into a unified vision. In order to do so, we adopted the Plan Vert of Beirut as a base. This plan, commissioned by Ile-de-France in 2013, this plan was designed by URBI, Habib Dibis architects and urbanists with his collaborators, and was submitted to the municipality of Beirut. The objectives of this plan span over strengthening neighborhood identity and social justice, providing a framework for soft mobility in the city, and protecting the city's biodiversity. To that end, they surveyed all gardens, green and open spaces in Beirut. It then presented spatial landscape strategies that considered green corridors, pedestrian connectivity, existing gardens and open spaces, and the vegetative layer. It was followed by design guidelines and master plans. As we build on this plan and its fundamental outcomes, the BUL considered the challenges at the city scale, built on the assets of the city, and identified opportunities. The challenges identified here are the outcome of several studies done at BUL before and after the blast. City scale rupture, however, is a problem that I would like to highlight today. This rupture is due to radical urban and landscape transformations that took place during the last century, where large-scale infrastructure were being imposed into the city. In fact, Beirut waterfront had undergone major land reclamation to accommodate for the port expansion, and which altered its curvy coastline and blocked people's access to the sea. Historically, the harbor was strongly anchored within the city, ensuring physical permeability between the port and the city. And the port was part of the social identity of the Beirutis, and it was a source of living for a wide range of communities like Attalin al-Por or the merchants of the city. And there are socio-spatial activities related to the port, like fishing, swimming, and promenades along the sea that are still present in the collective memory of the Beirutis, especially those in Karentina. However, with the modernization of the traditional harbor and its progressive expansion through the city its progressive expansion has brought about huge consequences to the city's economy and urban life. This port became a purely economic zone, an independent entrepreneurial entity which functions independently from the city's economy, and the public life was pushed away. This has led to the isolation of neighborhoods, starting by Gemmayzeh and ending by completely enclaving Karentina. Similarly, the dominance of the vehicular network again came at the expense of natural landscapes. Beirut River is one of the major city's waterfronts that was a source of attraction for the people, was covered, reduced in size of its floodplain, and eventually abandoned. In the late 50s, also, the pavement of Shar Helo Avenue caused a disruption in the social fabric in the city, causing a rupture between two parts of the city, mainly Mar Mikhail and Karentina, which were strongly connected through Al-Khudr Street and Brahim Basha Street. Now, despite the many challenges, there are many assets which we can build on in terms of open spaces and heritage landscapes. Although little remains of Beirut's landscape heritage, these green and open spaces remain integral to the historic urban fabric of the city. In previous studies at BUL, we have identified most of these landscapes, including residential gardens, institutional green and open spaces, urban stairs, the remaining of railways and streets associated with social memories like Guru Street. Other assets are the buildings and landscapes which act as social magnets, which are associated with socio-spatial practices and or relating to a strong memory, such as the silos of the port. The third type of assets are the natural landscapes, or what remains from them. The natural coastline is an example of a natural setting that was incorporated into the built fabric. Today, pieces of this landscape remain around the Karentina and is now acting as a green buffer between the city and the port. Another example is the river estuary, which is the only natural part remaining of the riparian landscape after the river was covered with concrete. Not to forget also the rich vegetative green layer spread all over the city. And here I'm showing monumental trees, which are important natural assets in the city. Now, in order to build our vision, we looked at opportunities which we can make use of. A previous study at BUL actually shows surveying public parcels actually shows that 9% of municipal Beirut area is publicly owned or publicly used. If we zoom into the study area, we realize that a considerate amount of these parcels are actually in the neighborhood. Some are municipally owned, others are state-owned. In Karentina, they are occupied by the military. Added to this is the trajectory of Fuad Boutros Highway, where some of the parcels are partially publicly owned. So departing from these layers, which I have presented, we at BUL are building a vision that aims to transform large areas of public land into an open space network. The pillars of this vision is first enhancing the pedestrian mobility through creating strong public space connections between open spaces, especially heritage landscapes. This includes the Al-Masar Al-Akhdar Green Corridor, which was already explained, Karentina Open Space Network connecting the public garden in the neighborhood, Masar Al-Sikke, which revives the railway corridor and connects the upper city with the train station, redesigning Shar Helo Highway as an urban boulevard, and reactivating the historical connections through Brahim Basha and Street and Al-Khudr Street. To reclaiming Beirut River as a natural landscape and public destination and reconnecting it back to the city at more than one node. Highlighting Beirut's unique natural heritage embodied in the remaining of the natural coastline through activating it as a coastal corridor overlooking the port and connecting downtown to River Beirut. Re-envisioning the landfill in Burj Hamoud as a public destination that connects the river corridor and the coastline corridor. Demilitarizing Karentina and reusing of land currently occupied by the military for public good, such as social housing or public schools. Reinforcing the city-port connection by re-envisioning the role of the port as a commercial hub and a public destination, a part of a larger open space network that connects downtown to Karentina and to Mar Mikhail. We envision the port to be fragmented basins rather than a single block that allows for pedestrian permeability and public activities to take place. Now, these are the main objectives of the holistic vision at this stage. this is not a master plan or a final document, but rather these design conceptions are based on a forward-looking vision and work that is still in progress. This vision should be followed by design guidelines and endorsed by professional actors and the local community. The aim of raising this up today, however, is to trigger a conversation between planners, designers, activists, public agencies who might want to work together and for this unified vision. We aim also to channel the work of NGOs that is happening at a micro scale and bring it to the larger scale. We believe that this work should be governed and managed through public agency, and this is why we are working towards planning units in the municipality of Beirut. Now, at the end, this work, whether working towards a people-oriented city in general or reconnecting the port to the city in specific, these are all points that need to be worked through, and activists should work into changing the mindset of decision makers in order for this to happen. And this is why this could be a work that will be still in progress for a long period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. I'll invite Christine Madi as a discussant to join. Meanwhile, are Abir, Ali, and Lean here if they want to, if they can all sit over there.
They are not here.
Lean is here.
Lean is here.
Lean is here. Please, تفضلي Lean.
Abir shyly knows she's not here.
I'll present, meanwhile, very briefly, Christine. So Christine Madi is Associate Professor in Architecture, Urban Design, and Urban Planning at Notre Dame University Loisé. Her research covers public spaces with a focus on stable contexts, specifically in Beirut. She investigates public spaces' role in spatial justice, social integration, everyday life, and social practices, public health, and mobility. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Mona, and Serge, for inviting me to be part specifically of this panel, as it really interests me from the perspective of the work that I do. And I would like to thank the four presenters, Dana, Batul, Muhammad, and Mariam, for very clear presentations that really span different scales, and here lies the difficulties of talking about public spaces. I will not be summarizing what they presented, because this took quite a lot of time for them to explain. Rather, I would like to trigger some perhaps sensitive points to enable this discussion, which you very rightly said, it does require a lot of discussion. And I'm not starting in any particular order. To some extent, I'm following the presenter's order, but sometimes I'm also mixing some of the points that they mentioned. So the first, I think, interesting approach, and which is not very familiar in the Lebanese context, is the participatory approach. And this is what was presented in the case of Karentina with this the intervention that was presented. I was very pleased to see that the intervention was actually along a street, because I want to go back to the practice of public spaces in the Lebanese context. And if we think of the definition of public space in the Lebanese context, or even the legal term which is used, al-hayyiz al-am, people are not familiar with this term. So where does the practice of public space in Lebanon occur? And this is why I was interested in the mapping of the socio-spatial practices in the case of Karentina, and how you tried on the basis of that to select an initial intervention area. So the question is participation. Where does it happen? How does it happen? And with whom? And does it end with implementation? What happens after implementation? And is the custodian really a public authority, or should the custodian really be a public authority? I was intrigued Yet I support you also in what you said in one of your presentations, that one of the purpose of what you are doing is to inform dwellers about public space initiatives in their communities. And it is true, but if they are public space initiatives, why are dwellers not informed? Or why are they unaware of these spaces? And this is a very important question to ask in the Lebanese context, because it's a true question. Many dwellers do not know about such initiatives. So what about discussing further to what extent are people involved in public spaces, and what do these spaces mean for them? In two of your presentations, you mentioned, I think in the second presentation, the resistance of the public sector employees to approaches of public space. And then Mariam mentioned that we need to change the mindset of decision makers. But decision makers, after all, are also citizens of this country. So I wonder, should we also think about changing the mindset of the people? Because the understanding of people about what a public space is also very specific, and you very clearly demonstrated that with the shop owner who wanted to have different tiles just to mark where his shop is. And he is not doing that for no reason at all. It is out of a certain concern that this shop owner has. What is very interesting about your approach is, of course, working in a multi-scalar approach, but here I have some comments. And you emphasized the importance of linking and networking spaces in the city for them to actually have a meaning beyond the micro scale. And here I pose a question, and I understand that you are focusing on administrative Beirut, but if we take the Beirut River, it has 2 banks. And of course, this is the administrative limit. To what extent should we limit ourselves to administrative limits when we are talking about the linking of public spaces and public spaces that serve at different scales? And perhaps people in the suburbs are more in need of these public spaces in the capital city. When you spoke about participatory approaches, and again I come back to what you demonstrated with the shopkeeper's decision to change the tiles to differentiate his territory. What about the sense of belonging? Because I think in the Lebanese context, and especially after the war, I don't know, I'm a war generation person who was born during the war and grew up in the war. I think there is a lot of mistrust and a sense of no belonging when it comes to public property. So people very easily throw their cigarette butt or a tissue on the street because the street is not mine. Somebody can clean it, I don't care. So what about the sense of belonging? You went through all this effort to engage the community in rehabilitating a street, but do they have a sense of belonging just because the facades are repainted or the street is paved? And this also happens at the scale of residential buildings. So even within residential buildings, people have a sense of belonging to their apartment, but not the shared parts of the buildings in some cases. And the reason why I asked about post-implementation is because you did mention in some of the quotes of the people that they do not visit a space or they're not invited to a space because of the lack of maintenance. The municipality does not maintain this space. I wonder, is it the municipality who doesn't maintain, or is this a shared responsibility? Because people also don't maintain their spaces. They have no sense of belonging. And here I wonder, how can we establish a sense of stewardship? And then the sense of stewardship is not necessarily wholly dependent on the custodian who is a public authority. And I think I will end on that note. So when we are talking about multiple scales, and of course you focused on the area that was affected by the Beirut port blast, again, talking about the Beirut River, but also about other green spaces and opportunities for public spaces in Beirut. And you did mention that some of them are already in public ownership. And you said that basing yourselves on the plan vert, one component that is being emphasized or you are aiming to emphasize is walkability. But as we all know, walkability, not only because of the nature of the built environment, is not necessarily popular with all Beirutis or all Lebanese. And I wonder to what extent can we also think of public transport? So mobility that is not only walkability, walkability becomes part of it. And how can that inform perhaps the network and the scales of public spaces in the vision that you are trying to build? And thank you very much for your presentations.
Thank you, Christine. I would invite the researchers if you want to answer before we open the debate to the public.
Okay. Thank you so much, Christine. I'll respond regarding the participation approach. Just allow me first to say that working within a participatory approach is really challenging. And as Huwaida mentioned earlier, we do believe that it shouldn't always be just bottom-up, but rather a combination of bottom-up and top-down. And what we mean by participatory is that all the involved stakeholders should be part of this process. So we cannot do a project without involving the local authorities, the funding agencies, and the people as well, who should be part of the decision-making process. So it is really challenging to achieve the ultimate vision and objectives that we seek at the very beginning of any project. But we do believe that impact happens incrementally. So if we, for example, give the voice for the people to say that we want this in this design, for example, they are taking ownership in this project. And we try to engage the community, as I mentioned in my presentation, in different forms. So, for example, we train the local researchers so that they are part of the entire project, not just this spatial intervention, but rather the strategic framework. So we do believe that we want to build capacities in them beyond our intervention in Karentina, because basically they're going to be the custodians of this framework after we leave. Of course, this is very futuristic, but at the end, a specific impact will happen through time. One thing that you asked about is the sense of belonging. Of course, mapping the socio-spatial practices was really informative for us to understand what do these spaces mean for the people, how do they appropriate them, what type of practices they do there. And we respected the decision of the shop owner for his decision of using the ceramic tiles, although we explained to him that this might not be the best solution because you're disrupting the continuity, you might regret that in the future. But by the way, now he's regretting that, no, I should have listened to you. So basically people are learning and understanding and building knowledge about how to practice the public and how to protect their spaces. Yes, collectively. And as part also of building capacities in people and the impact of the participatory approach, we are seeing actually people who are, for example, watering the trees every day. We planted trees in an area that has no infrastructure, but some of the people actually, they are watering the trees every single day because they want their street to be a better place, because they belong to the street, and this street is part of their everyday life. And they spend most of their day in that street. They are also helping us in consultations, for example, in what type of paint to use. They are involving themselves in every single decision, and they actually requesting more representation. So regardless, given all the workshops that we conducted in the neighborhood, people are still asking for more representation. We want more. We want to be represented in these workshops. We want to have a say in every single project that is happening. And to me, I think this is the first step. This is the first step to changing the mindset. We cannot shift the mindset fully, but rather changing incrementally the mindset towards planning and participatory planning. Thank you.
I just wanted to point out something about the scale and the boundaries. First, we were already negotiating the issue of scale and where do we stop, and this is what we showed now is the area affected by the blast, but of course we are looking a much bigger scale, and especially when talking about the river, which is a natural landscape, and this is where boundaries, we cannot stop at administrative boundaries. And Jala Makhzoumi argues about that in landscape and know how boundaries have affected the ecologies and even social connectivity between landscapes. So this is a point. This is a good point. But of course, we will not stop at administrative boundaries. Second, concerning the mobility networks, we are working towards workshops to also integrate proposals for the transportation networks that are now on the table, and we want to integrate them towards this vision. And this is we also consider that open spaces also are important, and they should be linked to transportation networks. Okay.
Others?
Yes, I just wanted to address the question. First of all, thank you. All the questions you're raising are issues that we discussed amongst ourselves when we're working. Oh, sorry. So I wanted to address the question that is related to about dwellers being informed about what is happening. And this is something that we believe is very important. And this is part of why we have these platforms, all of these platforms online. But I think in our experience, when we have been approached by NGOs or an organization that is looking to intervene in the public space, they have this intention of doing something that is meaningful to the community. I think the will is there, but maybe the tools are not always present. Especially, they're also now introducing like a cash for work modality that is something that is imposed by donors, actually, just to involve the community in that sense. But I think they get also caught up in the many challenges, so the legal aspect that we've discussed, but also at the end of the day, they are liable and responsible towards their donor first, before they are to the community. And especially participation, we saw with Batul, and I think in general it's a very challenging task, but in Lebanon especially because of this individualistic, the first instinct of people when you say we're going to intervene on the public space is, oh, but this is where I park my car, this is where my house, no, this is the first instinct that they have is so participation is even more challenging in that sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana. Anyone else?
I just want to mention that very, very important point that you've highlighted on is the sense of belonging to the public space. Because if there's no sense of belonging, you wouldn't see it as a public space. It wouldn't have a name, it wouldn't have a function. So at the end of the day, what we're doing here is trying to, when we follow this micro-scale intervention or the tactical design approaches, is try to actually do something and then see, as Ariella mentioned yesterday, the thing about designers and planners having to do mistakes, and these mistakes would make you learn. And to get this sensible, this is the most challenging part for designers or people that intervene on public spaces. No matter how nice the renders might look or how nice the design might function, at the end of the day, it's the user. So this is why It's a very important point to follow up on, of course. And I think we've seen it more with Batul's presentation since the work has been implemented and the follow-up is being happened as we speak. But of course, this should be done at many levels as well. Yeah. So thank you for bringing this up. Yeah.
I just want to add one thing. Of course, we do believe the importance of engaging in community and so on, but also our role as researchers and professionals is to enlighten the community about the role of the local authorities. So one of the things that we encountered in Karentina is that, for example, people didn't know that the municipality has the right, for example, to stop a project or to stop an intervention or not to allow them to do something. So as part of our intervention is that to let them know that the municipality has the right to stop any project. They have the power to do so. And of course, this was part of the process as well.
Thank you, Batul. Christine, you have something you want to add? Yes.
So before opening the floor to questions, I just want to ask you, are you aware of the work of UN Habitat that took place between 2016 and 2018 in Naba and in Tripoli, in 2 different neighborhoods? And are you aware of the challenges they faced after implementation, even though there was a follow-up and rework of the public space in Naba with the input of the neighbors of this public space 1 year after its implementation? Are you aware of...
what type of projects? Public spaces?
Public spaces. They're basically playgrounds for children or very small scale, 200 square meters public spaces. And has UN Habitat been engaged in the Karentina project as part of the discussions that you presented?
Actually, UN Habitat are part, so they funded one of the open spaces in front of the hospital. Yeah. So they were part of the bigger project, the Open Space Network. Alongside with other actors such as ILO and UNDP.
Because what you described as the reaction of the residents of watering trees, trying to take care of the street, a while after happened in Naba for a year. And then for several reasons, external and internal, this stopped and the park has been closed. And actually now another NGO is trying to reactivate it. So it would be interesting to see what are factors that could deter the continuity of such interventions. And this is why I was interested in post-implementation. And I think I have to stop here to allow people to ask questions.
Thank you, Christine. So yes, the floor is open. Any questions from the public? Yes?
Thank you, everyone. I have a question for the researchers regarding the post-implementation process and monitoring. In some of the projects and other NGOs that we worked on, we had something called a maintenance committee that was responsible. It's a committee from the local residents of the neighborhood or from the local actors that is responsible to maintain whatever was rehabilitated or whatever that was implemented. So did you do such thing with the community, or do you have plans for this thing? Because what I've seen in our work is that even when there is a committee, such a committee, it's not always, as we see, effective, because after a while people stop being involved in such projects and they kind of forget, unfortunately, that this work or these public spaces are for them.
Okay.
Thank you.
May I respond? Yes. Okay. So basically, as I mentioned, the spatial intervention is part of an open space network project that includes other projects. One of these projects is a community center that we are working on in collaboration with the D4C, and it's funded by CUL, French funding. This project basically will allow for the continuity of other projects under the Open Space Network project. We formed a neighborhood committee, and this neighborhood committee will be working closely with an NGO for the operation of the center. This committee will basically be taking care of multiple issues and demands of the community, one of which is taking care of the public domain. And of course, the interventions that we are working on. So this will allow us to maintain these projects and keep the conversation going around the importance of the public domain, alongside with others, with other demands and priorities, as per the community necessitates.
Thank you, Batul. Other questions? Yes, please. Yeah, we do hear you.
Okay. So, okay.
Thank you. Throughout the day today, all of the panelists have mentioned the need for coordination, and you started out mentioning this on how what happens is a lot of groups, a lot of different entities are coming in and doing work, but one may not know what the other is doing. And sometimes it's a surprise when you find this out. This may have not have been your scope, but did you explore solutions? I know today we've mentioned it could be the municipality or another entity, but I haven't heard that there is actually a viable solution to developing some type of coordinating entity, especially here in Lebanon. And I wonder if you as a group have some proposals for some sustainable approach to having coordination for projects, whether it's in Beirut or any other municipality in Lebanon.
Okay, hi, thanks. So I think this started out at the beginning, the coordination problem. It was evident when the apartments were being repaired. There was overlap on buildings, apartments, etc. And so this is where I think FER, the Army's emergency room, stepped in, and delegated the areas to certain NGOs to work on. But it was really not enough. It wasn't like a very like a super efficient tool, if you will. But it improved things to a certain extent. And for us, it is one of the reasons why we started the platforms that we're working on, that the observatory, for example, that Antoine presented earlier. And the same thing happened when the funding started coming in for the public spaces and community facilities. We saw the overlap again. So, for example, for the Jesuit Sparks, you had like three different proposals, and two of them going through the municipality already, and just to take the permit, and it was really a mess. So you have this entity that's spending so much time to come up with the proposal, secure the funding, because you need to reach out to a donor, and then you come in, and there's like someone already getting a permit ahead of you. So, I mean, yeah, the platforms are one way, but obviously it's not enough. You need an actual entity to do that, and this is why we're always proposing to have that at the governorate, especially when it comes to the urban planning. But we're also proposing with the 3RF coordination. Mona, help me, the CPU or coordinate planning unit. Planning unit and the coordination unit, something like that, right? And this is something that Muna's involved in with the 3RF, the CSO committees, and I know that it has its own legs. So if you want to say something more about it. Okay.
Do you want to? There was, but go ahead.
just to say that it's a very valid question, of course, and it's one of the most problematic issues being addressed today. And as I tried to say in the morning, we believe that the best coordination mechanism should be housed in the governorate office, given the existing power configurations, that this is where we could have an accountable unit coordinating the multiple efforts and the very important efforts happening from NGOs, INGOs, CSOs, and that need a coordinating body. I mean, NGOs, INGOs, and CSOs are demanding this coordination to happen. There are talks, we are trying to advocate with the 3RF that this urban unit is established in autonomous ways at the 3RF. The negotiations are taking a lot of time. There is some receptivity to it, but I'm not very sure that it's going to happen under which umbrella. We're concerned that this could happen in a way where this unit has no, as Mona Fawaz says, no teeth. And if it has no teeth, it's useless. So we're wary about duplicating or making another committee or unit that is too diluted, that can be co-opted, and that has no effective agency, and most of all, that is not accountable to any process of accountability that is reliable and independent. It's a very complex issue. And I think it's one of the most complex issues, this institutional setup of that coordinating body in the present configuration of things. So it's a very difficult answer. I'm not really giving you any tangible response, but this is where we are.
Thank you, Mona. There was a question there.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question, because I'm not familiar with the legal framework. The expropriated, or the expropriations you mentioned in Hekme for the Fuad Butros highway, I was just wondering whether you know how it works legally. Can the expropriations just be sort of rediverted to new uses, to green gardeneries or whatsoever, or is it, once it's expropriated for creating a highway, it needs to be in the law used for transportation means? Yeah.
Actually, there's no specific use that these lands are meant to serve at the moment, but we are trying to use the fact that they are expropriated, either partially or completely, to actually propose something that could work, that could function, and could have a public use or something of a general use for the city, which would have something which would gain like the acceptance of many. This is what we're aiming for, to gain the acceptance of this project for many sides, and including public authorities that we're trying to reach out for all the time. So yeah, in terms of specific use, there is no specific use that's set for these lands as of yet.
If I may just add something about this, it's that in the law, if the land's been expropriated for a purpose, which in this case is the highway, and after 10 years the highway hasn't been implemented yet, the owner is allowed to claim their land back, but they have like 1 year to do that. And that's already been passed because it's been like 3 decades, I think. So in that sense, there are some laws regarding that, but we're also still trying to navigate very slowly the legal landscape to really understand, especially for the partially expropriated land, like how much has been expropriated, what was paid, who are the current owners still. And this is something that we actually have a meeting next week with someone from the municipality regarding that. But we're also facing some resistance regarding, so when we're asking for the documents and the decrees by which the payments were made, so when you want to go a bit in depth, we're facing a bit of resistance from several public institutions, because, I don't know, maybe they're still banking on building the highway, especially for the CDR, because they are the ones who re-earthed this plan back in the early 2010s, I think, when it was met with resistance from activists. So, yeah.
Needless to say here that some owners were did cash the money concerned those expropriation. So it makes it quite complicated. Any other question? So if there's no more questions or remarks, I would like first of all to thank you all. Thank you, Kassine. And I would invite Jad and Jad Tabet and Mona Fawaz for the closing panel. Thank you all.
كان هون لا هيدا للمنى خليه مع اللابتوب
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for sticking for so long with us. It gives really the MUPP, MUD program and the Beirut Urban Lab enormous joy to have Jad Tabet close the panel. The last time we had Jad with us, he was running for elections at the Order of Engineers and Architects. It was an incredibly hopeful moment, I have to tell you. And we wanted to move mountains, and we thought we could at the time. I think we've become a little bit more realistic since then. But Jad has shown to be even more of a champion, if you let me say. The fight he fought at the Order of Engineers and Architects to make data available, to create meaningful conversations about the city, and to continue to champion important causes like pedestrianization, like better mobility, protection of the public, really building custodians for the public, and making of the Order of Engineers and Architects during his mandate a space of serious conversations about how we can live together. This role has been incredibly important, and I think in many ways continued to really propelled the conversation in Lebanon despite it all. Since he left the order, he continues to be a champion of many causes, including heritage, and was telling me yesterday that he wrote almost single-handedly over a month, sleeplessly, for the protection of one of Lebanon's monuments. So again, it really gives me enormous pleasure. Of course, I think the students also know Jad, because when I was your age, I learned that Solidaire was a terrible project because of Jad. And so his work has really been very inspiring for a very long time. It's not only since 2019. We're very happy to have him with us today. I'll let him start the closing, and maybe I'll add a couple of notes at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mana. I'm really confused. Well, I think this day was very interesting. Yesterday we started with Ariela's examples and Ariela's experience. It was really refreshing. And today we continued in a really very, very challenging series of sessions. I think that the role that Beirut Urban Lab is playing today in Lebanon is a role that should be the role of public institutions. And somehow the Beirut Urban Lab is filling a void, which is the void of a public institution. And what Beirut Urban Lab is doing now is probably to put the base, is certainly to put the basis for the future planning unit at the municipality, if this planning unit is ever created. There are some very basic issues that were discussed during these sessions. I want to raise some of these issues and to raise some questions. The first question is, how can we do planning today? I think this is a basic issue. How can we imagine doing, us as planners or urban planners or activists or architects or whatever you want to say, to call us, how can we do planning today? How can we imagine planning today? We have to recognize, obviously, all of us, that state-driven planning is now obsolete. Some may regret it, others may find it positive, but no matters, it is a fact. The traditional state-driven planning doesn't function anymore. But what's important is to define what actors replace the state. How can we replace the state-driven planning model? I have heard today often repeated bottom-up as an alternative to top-down. Okay, this is good, it sounds beautiful, but in reality, and this is the big problem, in reality, not only in Lebanon, but everywhere in the world, what's replacing the state-driven planning is basically free market. They are shaping the space. And unfortunately, everywhere the choice is not between top-down and bottom-up, but between top-down and market-down. This is the big issue. So the problem is that how can we build a bottom-up approach that have some chance to be effective on the ground? How can we can always launch small initiatives somewhere here, I don't know, a small piazza somewhere or a small public space, but this is not enough. This is not enough. At the larger scale, we have to recognize that market forces are much stronger than us. So, the question that we are all faced with is, how can we work against and with market forces? It's not only to oppose market forces, it's not possible, they are stronger than us, but how can we work against them and with them? How can we control their impact, or try to control their impact, or divert it to serve the public good? This is finally what we should do. And to do so, we have to create synergies with the up. Alone, we're not strong enough. So somehow, and Joe spoke today about the difference between the state and public agencies. Yes, it's true. We have to find ways to collaborate with this part of the up, which is public agencies, to be able to control or divert or I don't know what, the market forces to serve the public good. But also we shouldn't forget that public agencies are somehow part of the state apparatus. So it's a very delicate, very fragile equilibrium that we have to find, whereby we collaborate with public agencies, but on the other side, we should keep a certain autonomy, a certain distance. This is the big issue, the basic issue of the public agency we are all speaking about. How can we create a public agency that has a real effective role on the ground, which means it should be somehow linked to a public, a planning agency that is effective on the ground. So it should somehow be linked to a public agency. But how can we make the conditions that this planning agency does not dilute into an administrative, bureaucratic, and even, organ? This is a really difficult issue. It's experimental. We have to try. We may lose. We may not succeed. But we have to try. This is the first problem, the first issue I wanted to raise. The other issue is the issue of the dichotomy between northern planning and southern planning. Yes, we have to replace Western models by new approaches driven from our conditions, local conditions, our history, etc., etc. I agree, we all agree. There are a lot of things about decolonizing planning, etc., etc. Mona Fawaz this morning, this sounds beautiful. We'll come back to Mona Fawaz later on. But questioning Western approaches is not enough. In the same time, we have to question our own history and our own tradition. We cannot only say, well, we're questioning Western approach, and we accept our history and our tradition as it is. So it's always a sort of, double strategy. If we don't do so, we will end up recreating a new rigid ideological model that is probably not better than the Western imported model. Mona Fawaz this morning, and come back to Mona, was questioning the geographic distinction of North and South, and introduced a new distinction whereby Northern planning refers to the traditional rigid master plan planning versus a more sensitive place-driven approach, which would be a place-driven and community-driven approach, which would be South. Yes, we can say so. As an example, I want to take the example of the HUL approach, the historic urban landscape approach that was presented by Huwaida. It happened that 15 years ago, I was directly involved at UNESCO on the discussions about this HUL approach. The HUL approach started funny. It started with something very trivial. There was a project in, the World Heritage Committee in 2001 inscribed Vienna, the historic center of Vienna, on the World Heritage List. After 2 years, a new project was launched just at the limit of the inscribed zone, with a big commercial center, huge towers, etc., etc. So there was a discussion in the committee what do we do with this project? It's outside the inscribed zone, but it has a lot of influence on the inscribed zone. You know, Vienna, the historic center with these, small towers, traditional towers of the churches and cathedrals and museums, etc., etc. And suddenly, there was this huge center with several towers that, okay. What do we do with this? So, traditional heritage conservators said, well, we should prevent them to do so, it will affect, etc., etc. So the discussion started by saying it's not only an issue of towers versus historic center. We should think larger than that. And the issue, and we questioned, I mean, the group that was discussing started questioning the whole traditional approach to heritage, where heritage was linked basically to historic forms, to architectural, etc. In the World Heritage Convention, there's nothing called urban heritage. There is something called a monument or a series of a group of buildings and then natural sites. There's nothing called urban heritage in the convention. So we started questioning this whole issue, and after, let's say, I mean, we had a series of meetings. We were a group of 5 persons finally working on this issue. And finally, in 2011, we ended up with this recommendation, which is a historic urban landscape, that puts the basis for another approach to urban heritage, whereby urban heritage is conceived as the historic urban landscape as series of layers that start with geography, topography, natural, urban urban texture, social, economic, modern architecture, modern forms, landscape, intangible, etc., etc., etc. Okay. So what's important is that the resistance, I mean, don't think it was easy. There was a strong resistance in UNESCO, in ICOMOS, in all these, heritage, traditional heritage communities. There was a very strong resistance to this whole approach. And analyzing this resistance, in fact, and this is where we come back to this issue of North and South. I mean, analyzing this resistance, we understood that basically the whole approach is in contradiction with all the Western tradition of heritage. You know that the notion of heritage started in the West. I mean, it's not here. It started with the French Revolution as a reaction to the demolitions that were done, and then it was amplified after the Industrial Revolution. The notion of heritage was always developed as a reaction to something, to new things, to modernization. So the traditional notion of heritage was very much linked to protection of monuments, protection of objects, protection of artifacts. This doesn't work, and what's very important is that this doesn't work in our country. We don't have the tradition of protecting monuments.
We don't protect human beings.
There is nothing like this. Even the Arabic or cities or the Muslim cities or the Islamic cities, call it however you want, there are no monuments there. Monuments are directly part of an urban fabric, of traditions, of uses, of of intangible values, of. There's nothing called a monument by itself. So, in fact, this notion of Hull is a southern notion, but it has been adopted today. It has become a notion that has been accepted by everybody. And it has become a Western notion. So the limits between south, north, west, east, okay. This is what. The third issue I wanted to raise is the issue of participatory planning, or community-based approach to planning. It's very important, obviously. And once again, this raises the issue of top-down, bottom-up. It happens that I had several experiences, either in Lebanon or in France, about this issue of participatory planning. In France, it has become a sort of, since 15 years, it has become something which is, you cannot do any project if you don't have this issue of participatory discussions, etc., with communities. It's very good, but we should know that it's easier to launch certain approach on a micro level, but it's much more difficult on a larger scale. And you have a lot of challenges that you have to face. The colleagues here spoke about some of these challenges. But one of these challenges is resistance to change. People are used to ways of, handling with a space. This guy, this shopkeeper, had he's used to have, he doesn't want to change his habits. And you can propose images and explain that it will be better, it will be for the good of everybody, etc. But there is somehow a sort of resistance to change habits. There is also planning illiteracy. It's very difficult. And this I met not only in Lebanon, I met this in France. It's very difficult to explain to people what you want to do. It's very difficult even if you present images, always that images are always never a real translation of reality. So this is another challenge. The other challenge is private interests. You all spoke about this. The issue of this shopkeeper is nothing, but I have another example. For example, I was with Habib some weeks ago. We were walking in this Masar Akhdar area. And we were at the top of the big ghulam staircase. You have two ghulams, the small ghulam and the big ghulam. And the big ghulam ends up near this Masar Akhdar area. And there were two cars on the public space and blocking the possibility of, blocking the end of the ghulam stair. And there were people, there was a lady there. And we said, what is this car, etc. And she came, this is my car. This is our car. We told her, yes, but this is a public space. Oh, no, it's ours. We have always been parking our cars here, and okay. What would we do with these people? I mean, they consider that they have always been parking their car here. Nobody never told them it's a public space. And if you want to remove them, it will create a real problem. So the issue of private interest is important, and it's a real challenge to be able to solve this issue of private. Or the issue of parkings. I mean, in this small piazza you wanted to create I mean, parking spaces, we have to, I mean, Ariella spoke yesterday about the question of the pedestrianization. People do not want, I mean, it's very difficult to explain to people that we will create a pedestrian zone. They will never accept at the beginning. And then when it's created, they accept it. But this means that participatory planning sometimes should stop at a certain limit. And there should be a decision from up to impose things. Because if you continue always saying, okay, participatory will take, sometimes you will not be able to create change. It's very difficult to find where to stop, where to continue, what are the limits. It's not easy, I agree. But it's an issue. The last thing is the question of time. We spoke about it last time, and here I want to recall an experience I had also with my friend Habib, my alter ego. In 2001, we launched a project in a village called Salima. Salima was a village, it's a village that was a mixed village, Christian and Druze, and during the years of war there have been massacres on both sides. And then in the, I think 1999, there have been a sort of musalaha, reconciliation, and families started coming back there. And it happened that I was working with Habib on a project of protection, landscape protection of the area in Ernail, I mean the forests of Ernail and Hammana and Falouga, etc. So when we were coming back to Beirut by car, we noticed that people were returning to Salima and were destroying the old stone houses to build new houses with parpaing, concrete blocks, etc. So we stopped there, we asked them what's happening, and they told us that, well, the law gives compensation to the people. I mean, when you want to get compensation for the state, if you don't have anymore your house, you get big amount, and if you want to renovate your house, you get a small amount. So people were demolishing their house in order to get the big compensation. So at that time, the Minister of Culture was Ghassan Salami. So I went to see Ghassam, I spoke with him, and he was able to change the issue, and well, we selected, I mean, we did a sort of survey of the historic, or the heritage or of the stone. I don't know what you want to call them, stone houses or heritage houses, etc. They were, we had we did a sort of survey of these, and for these houses, they were given not only the full compensation, but the double of the compensation in order that people preserve them and restore them. Okay, it worked well the first year, the second year, and then we did a sort of workshop. We discovered that there were 17 fountains in Salima that were abandoned. So we did a project with students, Lebanese and French students, to restore the fountains. We had some artists that came with us. We restored. It was fantastic. During 2 years, everything went well. And then, well, we left the place. We didn't have any more, I mean, all this should be subsidized. We didn't have things. So we left the place, and after 5 years, the fountains were demolished. People re-demolished their stone houses and built houses with concrete in order to add new floors, etc., etc. So the issue of time is very important. When you are in the process, you can really, in certain conditions, mobilize the population, explain, etc., have them participate. But if you leave things, if there is no continuity, it will never be sustainable. There should be a way to ensure a follow-up and a continuity during a long period. This is really the essence of participatory planning. If there is no continuity, if there is no follow-up, it will become completely useless. These are some of the questions that I wanted to raise.
Thank you, Jad. Really, I mean, these are great comments, extremely insightful, but also worthy of another city debate. I wish I could believe that everyone would have the patience to get me to engage. I have so much to say, but I won't. I'll just say something about that last point, which I think is absolutely critical. I think the entire conversation about the custody of the planning project is exactly this. If you think that as a planner, in a society like ours or in any other concept, you can go and tell someone else what to do and then leave, it doesn't work. There has to be a collective that is invested in a project. And that's the political dimension of planning, I think. That's, again, worth another city debate. So I'll stop here. We started yesterday with a note from Ariella Maspungi to be optimistic, to be delusional almost, to believe in change, to believe that we can do it. And then a challenge from my colleague and professor, Robert Saliba, to move from La La Land to Limbo Land and imagine how they can intersect. I think we moved to Limbo Land today, and we saw many ways in which Limbo Land is reaching out to La La Lands. They may not be those necessarily that Ariella showed us yesterday, but they are La La Lands for how we can do things better, different, more like us, more like we aspire for them to be. And I think that that happy note, that delusional note, we need to keep it, because that's what keeps us here at doing research, believing that we can build better cities, Beirut, but also many others that I know many students and colleagues here care about. So I think on this note of commitment to delusion and to making it a better word, we'll close City Debates 2022. I want to thank everyone who stuck with us for so long. I want to thank particularly my colleague Bona Harib for setting this together. And of course, yes. And then, of course, Ariella and Jad for coming from so far and obliging our invitation. All the researchers at the Beirut Urban Lab, you saw them today very confident, wonderful. They've been preparing like hell. They've been anxious. They've been serious. They took the challenge serious, and they make everyone proud. So really, guys, thank you for making it possible that we dream so far. Also, our colleagues from Fondation de France, of course. Jean-Pierre, you've stuck with us for 2 days. That's absolutely impressive. Thank you, Eric, Madame Mo. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, the discussants. Serge, you're part of the family, of course, and everyone else I'm forgetting. And to the MUPP, MUD students, I hope that you'll help us set up an even better one next year. And of course, everyone supporting IT secretaries who are not even able to be here and others, thank you. And I hope you can now rest and have at least one weekend day. Thank you. Thanks, Chad.